Welcome to Illuminating Hope, a podcast of Hope House. In this series, Advocating Justice, the Legal Battle, we dive into the legal battles that shape the fight for domestic violence survivors. In each episode, we bring you powerful conversations with the legal teams, court advocates, and change makers working tirelessly to bring justice, protection, and hope to survivors of domestic violence. From the courthouse to policy changes, from survivors' rights to legal strategies, we uncover the critical role the justice system plays in breaking cycles of abuse. Whether you are a survivor, advocate, or someone passionate about justice, this podcast series will empower and inform you. Justice isn't just about the law. It's about giving survivors a voice, protection, and a future. Megan and Tracey, welcome to the Illuminating Hope podcast. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having us.
I am really excited about this conversation because this is a partnership I did not know that Hope House had, so I can't wait to hear a lot more about it. So CASA, which is the court-appointed special advocates, we partner with in a very unique way.
One of the newer things that we're doing is a training series with individuals associated with CASA, and within that training, we focus on safety and support to system-involved survivors that have lived through that domestic violence experience and may still be living through it and are also going through court systems with their own custody with abusive partners. And in doing that, we hope to help volunteers to better understand survivors and also better understand their unique situations. Because a family, a survivor that is going through domestic violence is very unique, and we want to help those individuals tailor how they're working with that population so that way we can better support them. Through doing that, we're helping them to address the needs of those survivors by helping to increase their connection, working to reflect on maybe their own typical verbiage, their typical ways of responding to certain crises, and just reflecting on that and potentially making some modifications, some updates to language that they use. One thing that we've talked a lot about, especially in our last training, is transitioning some of the verbiage from victim to survivor. And that's difficult for those of us even working in this field. And so that's one of the topics that we talk about and bring light to and just really connect and let them know that it can be a struggle for us too.
And can you talk about what CASA is and what the volunteers do?
So CASA is an organization, and currently Children's Division is using CASA's attorneys and as their guardian ad litems. And so that's why it was so important for us to do training for them. It's because they've taken over that piece. And so the volunteers are the ones that go out and meet with the kids and make recommendations to the CASA attorneys who then represent in court. So the importance of that is they get to spend more time with the kids than in court, where a guardian ad litem may only meet with the kid once or twice or has limited amount of time. The CASA volunteers can go out and really get to know the kids and really make a good decision as to what's in the best interest of the kids.
Can you go back and talk about, so you talked about guardian ad litem. That's not necessarily a term everybody has been familiar with.
So the guardian ad litem is the attorney that represents the children. They are supposed to stay neutral and make recommendations that are in the best interest of the kids, but not based either for mother or father. And so like I said, in the custody court, there's guardian ad litem also, but they just don't have a lot of time to really get to know the kids because they have such high volume of cases. A CASA volunteer does have that time and can really spend a good amount of time with the kids.
What are some of the biggest challenges the new volunteers are facing that you're hearing during any of these trainings when they're working with the children?
I think some of them haven't really understood their own trauma that they've experienced. And when we do these trainings, they can get triggered themselves and not really realize it until we start talking about some of the issues. So I think that's a huge problem. Sometimes if you haven't dealt with it yourself, it can kind of skew how you work with survivors.
And responses and reactions are so different whenever you are still dealing with trauma. I know when I go out and speak, there's often different kind of trauma responses from different people in the audiences that they'll either come up and talk to me later, or they'll be abrupt and actually interrupt the speaking engagement, which has happened because of a trauma response. So that's a very valid point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and one important thing that we really strive to do with our trainings is start our training by taking note of our self-care, taking note of where we're at right now, and going ahead and making a plan of action of things that we can do in this moment to meet our needs if we're feeling triggered, things that we might be able to do outside of the room to meet whatever those needs are. And so we find that that's incredibly important because you never really know what will come up, and it's always the best plan of action going forward, having that plan in place. One other thing that I also notice as a challenge, our volunteers, sometimes that opportunity is the first opportunity that they're having to come face to face with some of the misconceptions that they may have. A very common misconception and something that we've heard some feedback on is, I never realized all of the things making it so hard for them to leave. I never knew. I always thought they had these things in place, and why aren't they using those resources or those avenues? And so that's a big thing that has come up as well, and it's been a really great opportunity for us to be there with them as they're having that experience.
I think sometimes the volunteers, they can get into the business of being a volunteer, working in that organization, because they want so much for survivors to make the right decision or to do what they want them to do. And so it's important in the training too to talk about, it's not our job to make decisions for other people. And working in this, having worked in domestic violence a long time, it can be very difficult when you see somebody who's jeopardizing their chance to get their kids back or jeopardizing their life. And it can be hard to sit on the sidelines and watch that. But being able to separate yourself from being encouraging instead of dictating or not using it against the survivor when she's not doing what you think she should be doing. So we do talk about that in our training also.
Yeah, I would say that oftentimes there's been this big misconception that child protective systems, which would be CASA, Children's Division, and adult protective systems can't work together. They're at odds at each other. Adult protective systems just want to take care of the adult, and the children just want to take care of the children, and then we can't be on the same page, which then over the years, which is where Tracey's job kind of has originated and continued to develop, was around, we have to figure out how to keep the children safe with a non-offending parent. And so bridging those two worlds, though sometimes have been a little difficult, actually has proven time and time again to be the best way to help these families through that system.
That's really an interesting point. Why do you think those two systems can't work together well?
I personally think that it just took somebody to say, hey, wait, we're all for the same thing. We want these families to be successful, but in order to do that, each have to have support. The children have to have support, as well as the non-offending parent has to have support. And support can look different in a lot of ways. It might be the path might look a little different, but we want the same outcome. First of all, I don't know if everyone was even sitting at the same table having these conversations, let alone willing to take a breath and listen to figure out how we can move forward together, rather than just pointing fingers that it's your fault, no, it's your fault.
And I think that's some of what you guys were talking about comes in, is that the adult system and the child system would have preconceived notions about why the family was in the situation that they were in, why judgment and not having any kind of room for understanding why someone might make the decisions that they made. But I think that with the concerted effort, and Tracey, with your role over the last 20 years, you have made a huge impact in how the families are perceived and that there is a workable solution.
I think that the importance of us being involved in these systems, whether it's family court or any court, is that we are the experts. They don't know domestic violence. They're not going to know all that we know, and so to be able to stand up for the survivor, to be able to also understand the system enough to be able to talk that language, so that when clients come to me and they're telling me what their experience is, and I have enough understanding to be able to go, well, it doesn't sound quite right, let me check into that, or to be able to explain it to them in a different way that they can understand it. They just want to understand what they're going through. Even if it's not always in their favor, if they understand what you're saying or why Children's Division's doing what they're doing, it makes a huge impact. But also sitting in the meetings for them to now look at and say, okay, Tracey, what do you think about how does this fit into domestic violence? Or how calling me and saying, how can we help, instead of in the past where it was, okay, we don't really want you there because we don't think, there was just a misconception of how we could work together. So.
I think that misconception was that we didn't care about the kids, that we were only interested in making sure that mom had what she needed. And that I think it took you a long time and repeated conversations to show them that our interest is in both, keeping both safe. I think that was one of the hugest hurdles that I recall that you had, was that they had just had this preconceived notion that we didn't care about the kids.
Or that we were aligning with the survivors at the expense of putting kids in danger. And so, getting past that misconception that we're not going to do that. We're never going to put kids in danger. That took a long time, but it's that consistency. So having these trainings where, again, reminding them we're here. I've had workers call after trainings, or other staff member have called after trainings themselves being in domestic violence. And that understanding that any of us could be survivors, right? That whether you're a children's division worker, whether you're a lawyer, we will help whoever you are.
And I think, too, both systems, the child protective system and the adult protective system, they're separate. There's not a bridge that talk to each other. And, again, Tracey's position is that bridge. Because in the child protection system, they would say, okay, to the non-offending parent, go get a restraining order. So they go over to the adult protective system, and they're told, you don't have enough to get a restraining order. Well, back to the child protective system, it was then said, oh, well, you just must not care about your kids because you didn't get it. But they're standing there saying, but I couldn't get it. I feel like, I know this makes me sound old, but that Stretch Armstrong doll where you
totally
pull the
know
arms one way, leg the other way. I mean, that's how our victims were being told what to do. And then you're not successful. And then we're clogging up both systems because we're not successful. These families aren't successful. They're staying on dockets longer. They're staying in care longer when that doesn't have to be. Most times, Tracey is the bridge between those two systems.
You would think if there were less preconceived notions and more curiosity about really what's going on in this individual system, that would solve a lot of the problems. When we're talking about training the CASA volunteers, how do you count success and effectiveness with that? And what type of vocation do the volunteers come from?
I'm not sure what their background is, but I think success is getting them there to begin with and then having them engaged. The last training we did, they were all engaged in talking and asking questions. So to me, that's success.
Yeah, I agree. I think anyone being able to walk away from the training saying, I know more about domestic violence, that in itself is a win. I think stretching further beyond that, we speak a lot about lethality. We speak a lot about lethality assessments, and we really have a very in-depth conversation about how lethality is more than punching. Lethality is more than saying, I will kill you. Lethality is more than brandishing weapons. Lethality is so much more than that, and being able to have those conversations. And so I would say it's an extra success if they're able to walk away and say, not only do I know more about domestic violence, I know a lot more about lethality. And because of that information, they're able to pass it on. And all of our hope is that it's one less statistic.
It's one thing to understand domestic violence. It's another to give them some tips on then what do we do with it. Mm-hmm. So how do I work with these moms that I know there's domestic violence but she's denying it? Or how do I talk to the kids about it? And so being able to give them those hints and tips, I think if they can take something away from it, then it's successful.
Take me through what you would want somebody, if they had one takeaway, take me through what that would be in your trainings.
I would say an individual knowing what to do next. Whether that is they feel that they have the skills to take that next step, and if not, they have resources of who they can turn to assist with that next step. And I think that's paramount.
For me, it would be that they can put away some preconceived notions and see each survivor as an individual, and that not everything is black and white, and see the person for who they are instead of trying to put them in a box.
I couldn't agree with that more. Both your points are so valid. Sometimes I feel like when society thinks about survivors, it almost dehumanizes really that human piece of it, because that is a human being individually going through. They're not a domestic violence wheel. They're not a cycle of violence. They are a human being that need help.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important part too, coming back to the point of who's at the table.
Right.
Sometimes there isn't a table. Sometimes we have to make the table table for others to sit at. Being a part of this and having this connection and bridging these gaps, certainly therapists alone are not going to change all of these things. Just therapists, just social workers, or just attorneys alone. And it's a shared collaborative. And so being able to construct the table, be at the table, and ensure that everyone has a seat at that table is really important.
The one takeaway I can think of is if something kind of makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up and you go, oh, that's weird. If the only thing you can remember is to call Tracey Pickering at Hope House, give her a call. That's right. That's the only thing you can remember, then do that. That's my take.
That was my thought too.
Yeah.
Just walk away with knowing that Tracey's a resource.
How did we begin this relationship with Child Protective Services? Like, how did you get your foot in the door? Because that's a big deal, and I know that's reaching back 20 years.
Made me. 20-some years ago, we had a grant, and so then my position became working with Children's Division. I didn't know what I was doing. Didn't really have any, as I recall, I'm not sure I had a desire to work with Children's Division, but it started out that way. And then I remember then my supervisor and I would go speak to them, and there was a lot of animosity in that beginning, because
I was kind of wondering about that.
They didn't want to, because they would come to the shelter, and because we wouldn't just let them walk back to the shelter, and there was a lot of misunderstanding that we were harboring the women from them being able to have contact with them. And from our perspective, from the domestic violence perspective, there was animosity that they were blaming the victims by charging them with failing to protect because they happened to be in a domestic violence relationship. And so then Eileen was involved in Safe and Together.
Yes.
So that was an organization that brought together, that started conversation. But Hope House was the first agency that really started working with and doing this. Now there's more of it. And so it just started going to court and eventually learning the language and then getting inspired by it, passionate about it. I wasn't passionate about it in the beginning, but eventually it gave. You're here 20 years, eventually you either get passionate about something or I guess you don't do it anymore. And then it just grew from there.
I think that's how so many of our programs have started. We didn't know what we were doing, and we just figured it out as we went along.
Well, we saw that there was such an injustice. It's
Right.
not right, not fair. It just wasn't working. That survivors not only are being put in this system, everything's put on the weight of their shoulders. That it's their fault. It's their fault they're staying in this abusive relationship. It's their fault that this is happening to the kids. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. When in actuality, they really don't have any control of what was going on. This system tells them they have to do this, A, B, C, and D, and then this system said, oh, well, if you aren't doing that, you got to be doing, LMNOP, and we kept hearing that over and over from the people we were serving, and that's how many of Hope House programs came, was from the voice of the victim. The voice of the person we're serving is saying, this keeps happening, what do we do here? And luckily, the Safe Family Coalition was a group of community from other domestic violence agencies, Children's Division. We were lucky enough to have our first contract attorney at that time, who also had some past history in working with down in that court. Who knew who to open the doors to build us a table? Somebody needed to know somebody to trust enough to get us all in the same room, all at the same table. And that's kind of how it all started. Was we knew there was a problem because we kept hearing it, but we didn't know how to make it into that system.
Not an easy feat.
And there were cases, I remember I had a client who had 2 domestic violence relationships in 5 years, and there was that pattern. It's a pattern, and that what I would hear at court is, well, she has a pattern of, so therefore they're saying that means she's not a good mom, or there must be a deficit in her. But when you sit with the victims and you go to meetings and you go to court and you hear some of that stuff, you can't help but not stand up and go, wait, what are we doing here? That's where that advocacy piece came to life. And now it's much better. Now I don't see those, but that was the way it was in the beginning. And nobody challenged it until we started at Hope House, started going to the meetings and going, wait a minute, let's not do this, or standing up for the victim to say this is why she may have made those choices, or advocating on her behalf.
Well, the offenders weren't made to take responsibility.
Right.
That was not a system. That's not how it was shaped. And that's, again, where we're, trying to stop victim blaming and make those systems so that the offender should be held accountable for their actions. That's period. Why are all these systems set up in a way that, again, the non-offending parent and these children are never going to succeed if we're trying to accommodate abusers? We're not. You cannot parent with an abuser. And that we had to get through their heads.
I was going to say, we came with some preconceived notions too.
We did.
So we came to the table with having to have some of that.
Get through our heads.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And we just put it out on the table and talk about the frustration. I remember those conversations. It's like, wait a minute. This is the non-offending parent. What are we doing here? That they're the focus and not the offending parent.
And with the collaboration, it's not just you going and telling them the way that your system works, but you have to understand their system too. You have to be able to talk their language. You have to be able to explain it to the victim in a way that the court is seeing it, so that you can come to some collaboration. And so that was really important. But in those early days, I remember the survivors supposed to be working full time, supposed to be having their visits 3 times a week, and then they're supposed to be in therapy, and then they're supposed to have 2 or 3 other services, while the abuser wasn't meant to do anything because he wasn't going to do it, and she wanted her kids back. And so they would just keep adding services. And so we've come a long way from that, and holding abusers accountable and being a little more realistic in what expectations should be for survivors. Some of that's because we go to the meetings and go, wait a minute, she can't do, you want her to do visits at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, how's she supposed to work? And then you're trying to just be a little more realistic in what is appropriate expectations.
When we do these trainings, do we have any kind of required ongoing education or refresher courses for the volunteers after that initial training?
So as of right now, we are kind of starting this initiative, and so really kind of working toward these initial trainings first. So working with CASA to set up a frequency to offer these trainings, and then in addition to that, we do offer a survey at the end of our training, and then do plan to do a follow-up survey as well, just as a way of checking in to see and ask the information that we provided to you in the last 6 months. What of that information did you feel was the most helpful? What did you feel from your lived experience you need more of? And really, we are waiting to hear back from those individuals that have come to those initial trainings to let us know where to go next. And so that's really where we're at in this process right now.
We'll be talking with Tamara B., and she is going to also be talking about the Kansas City, Missouri Bar Foundation. And they do that domestic violence training each year. And again, they've been around, I don't know, it's been 27, 28 years. They started really bringing everybody together. It's not just lawyers. There are children's division and domestic violence agencies, law enforcement, bringing so many people together. So that's kind of where that started, is that opportunity to get everybody in the same room, hearing the same message, which is another important thing, is that the same message is being heard. So that is kind of how the first training type thing even really started, was the Kansas City, Missouri Bar Association.
I'm a huge advocate for nonprofits working together because I think we're stronger as a community. So the training that you guys put on for CASA Volunteers, I think, is an amazing thing that we can contribute and even help our survivors and their children. The last 20 years has been good for that. Thank you guys so much for coming on today. Is there anything else that you'd like to speak about as far as the trainings?
Always willing to train on whatever I can as far as domestic violence. I'll go anywhere.
I feel the same way.
I think for us, we are just very responsive to community needs, to survivors' needs, to other agencies' needs, and so we are always here with ears wide open, just ready to hear what that need is, and so that way we can determine how we can meet that need.
Always willing to combat those myths and misnomers and advocate for our survivors and their children.
Well, one of the things, too, I just want to say that Tracey does a wonderful job of is listening to the voices of the survivor. And when she starts seeing this as a pattern, next thing you know, she's sending out emails, she's on the phone investigating, like, what is happening here? Was this new? Oh, this is good, this is bad. That's what makes this program so successful, is those voices of the survivors are being heard, and she's just not sitting with that. She's doing the what next with that. And I think that that's so important, and big kudos to her and her job and her commitment that she's had to Hope House and to victims of domestic violence. That is what really takes us to the what next.
Well, I think with Hope House, that for me to go in and say, look, let's try this or let's do that, I think Hope House has always been open to the suggestion of things, even if they may seem crazy in the moment, and that allows us to try new things. And it may work, it may not, or do new group, but Hope House has always been open to new ideas.
I agree. I'm an idea machine all the time for Marianne and Eileen, for sure. Thank you guys so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Illuminating Hope, a podcast of Hope House. A special thank you to our newest recurring donor, Liz Crenshaw, Farmers Insurance. Learn how you can support Hope House and domestic violence survivors by visiting hopehouse.net.